Hi guys, Keith from Markenberg Farms. It is now second week October, and we finally got our soil test back. So we're going to go ahead inside and start to look at the results and kind of determine what we need to do with it. I'm working on a spreadsheet to kind of get that all out. So let me show you. And if you missed out, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did soil test, and I did a video on that of how to do them. So check that out if you'd like to see it. So let's get into this. So we have our results back from the My Soil test that we sent in. Results were back in the stated time period, so that wasn't an issue. The one thing I did find strange, I dropped them both in the mailbox at the same exact time. One got there about 2 days before the other one. Same thing with getting results back, is about 2 days difference. But without further ado, let's go ahead and check our results. Remember, we did one from a current plot and an unamended. That's where we have the descriptions here. We check on the completed test and we can kind of see what our results were. So they're loading up our results. Again, we've got what it is. Then we have our results. The biggest problem I've had with interpreting the results from here is that over here it states that these are all in part per million, which I don't believe they are, just by kind of looking at some of the numbers that are being reported. They're somewhat confusing because in parts per million of calcium, I know that I have like 2,000 out there in parts per million. So that can't be right. Somehow they're doing some kind of conversion. I don't know if it's to the MEQs, which would be the mega equivalents, or what exactly. But for most people, the most important part is these two optimal lines that they show you. So there is what they consider your max optimal and your lower optimal. So ideally, you want to have everything in between the two. Now, this sulfur number, I've got another soil test we'll look at here in a second, is not high. It's just showing that it's high. Same thing with salt. I do not have a high level of salt out there either. I don't want to say these are anomalies with the test, but I do believe it has something to do with the way that they're interpreting the results. Like I said, most of the stuff's right on par. I know my magnesium's low. I had to fix that by adding calcium. I know my pH is low. 5.78, that's real low. You ideally should have like a 6.2 to 6.8. So that's something I know I need to work up. I know I have low pH on this soil. So I will definitely have to add lime this year to raise this up. Now, nitrogen, of course, I went in all plots that had already been cropped through, so there was nothing left in them. P and K, good. My micronutrients are a little low. I try not to push these too hard, especially the copper, because that's your antifungal right there, for at least for organic agriculture. Iron's really hard to move around. These four right here come in different micronutrient packages. So ideally you want to purchase a micronutrient package that has these in there. A lot of times they're liquid, but you can also find a solid that you can apply. The hardest part with applying these is they apply at a rate of like 25 pounds per acre, which is like nothing. Over a 100-foot bed, I think that comes out to about 2 cups. Don't take my word on that because that's just off the top of my head, but that's like nothing. But I mean, for the average person, this is a great tool to use. It does also have the organic and synthetic on it. Gives your bed length, tells you how much you need to put down of a 1200. I don't know where you're going to get 1200 at. Most organics are much lower than 12 unless you're using a fish emulsion of some kind. Most likely you're going to find numbers around 6. So with this recommendation of 1.75 pounds, you double it to 3 pounds, and that's per 100 square foot, which you can change. So you can change it to whatever size you're using and have a better idea of how much you need. It does not tell me how much to add to change my pH. It tells me to follow the manufacturer's recommendations, which is always, always, always a great way to go. And also with your pH, you try to aim lower than you need and work your way up. It's a lot easier to, at least in our area, to continue to work our way up than it is to try to come back down by adding sulfur. Sulfur takes a much longer time period to actually break down and start to affect the pH, where lime goes into the soil quicker and will more quickly raise our pH to an ideal level. Now, the MySoil test site also has some other great things on it. You can view your nutrient density score, which I'm not 100% certain where they're getting this from. It's got a little blurb on it. But if you get everything in the ideal range, of course you're going to be high. You can look at what you have now, and we're at medium. I'm assuming this is based on how many are in the ideal range versus how many are outside of it. I believe it would be a little bit more based on the base saturation numbers, which we'll get into those here in just a second when we look at our test results from our local ag lab. We'll go back to the screen we were just on. And we'll go over to the unamended ones to look at those as well. Here's where I do have some questions. I have a huge manganese spike on this test. I know 100% I do not have manganese levels like that out there in that field that are above optimum. I'm actually the exact opposite. Originally, when I saw this, I thought this might have something to do with the fact that there was an old power line tower out there that was a zinc manganese coating on it most likely, and when they cut it down, it might have sprayed that out through the field, but I'd expect to see zinc numbers up as well. Here's typical of our unamended land. No nitrogen is former Monsanto cropland. Phosphorus through the floor, just like anywhere in our area. The rest of our micros, usually pretty good. I do question the copper being up there because that shouldn't be quite that high. But all of these other ones, dead ringers for what I'd expect to see out there. The other thing you can do with this site is you can learn more, and it will actually tell you how to look for the different deficiencies. So it tells you what each of the areas is looking at and what it helps and what you can see, like phosphorus. Yes, it turns purple on edges. Very common to see, especially in our starts, because they just run out of phosphorus. Potassium, I don't know. My potassium's so high, I've never seen such a thing. And these other ones are a little bit more harder to view. I know pretty much from what I've read, iron deficiencies only really happen in the Southwest where they have higher soil pHs. And the rest just kind of tell you, what each of these do and how they help. But this is also very useful for somebody just wanting generalized information on what's going on with their test and why you're looking at these different things. Now we will go into our test from the Ag Lab and take a look at those. Now I went through our local extension office, and that is where I got these tests performed through. They push them through our local Ag University, which is Kansas State University out of Manhattan, Kansas. And these are the results we get. They always look at me funny when I come in there and ask for all this stuff, because I really do believe I'm the only one that asks for all this stuff. Everybody else is your typical row crop farmer. They come in, they want to know their NPK. That's it. They actually do have a program, at least in our state, where they cover the first 1250 of each test performed at their laboratory. And that's your basic NPK, maybe soil organic matter, and pH. So that's where these come into play. Each of these tests only cost $12.50-ish, if I remember right, to have these done through the lab. Now, they don't give you much in the idea of optimal levels for all of your micros and macronutrients. They do look at what they consider the more important things for row crop farming, which would be your pH, which, yes, I know I'm low, your phosphorus, and your potassium. Now, nitrogen, they just automatically assume is 0 because everybody is growing with ammonium nitrate, and they're injecting that every year no matter what to the levels specified by the seed manufacturers. I do get a reported number, which would seem about right. Now, I do know that they did mess up the plot numbers on these first two reports. This one is actually the one that was done for plot 7, and it says 8, which is an unamended area. But these numbers look a little bit more in line with what I've seen over time. I know my pH is creeping down. This says it's even lower than what the other tests found. But it also gives me my buffer pH, which is good for using a Lyme calculator, which you can go online and look up Lyme amendment calculator. There's a couple state universities that have them. They want your pH and your buffer pH. And then it'll tell you from where you're going to where you're heading. I'd like to be at about a 6.3 to 6.5 range. It's kind of what I'm shooting for. They actually want 12 pounds of limestone per 100 square feet, which to me sounds like a lot. I'll probably apply less and then re-examine this and come back to it. The other things you get are everything is in parts per million, which we'll get into when we start looking at the results from this. Again, they give you your numbers here. And see, here's my copper ppm is only 1.1, which the other test result had it completely different. It was way higher than that. Again, this one actually gives me my cation exchange capacity, which is very important to know for your soil type. Sandier soils have lower CEC numbers. More clay soils have higher CEC numbers. We are a Schiltzberg's loamy clay. So what that means, I'm not 100% certain, but what it does mean by the results is that we have a rather high CEC, which is more towards a heavy clay, which more equates to the amount that our soils will hold. The way you think of CEC is the size of the gas tank for the fuel you can actually put out in the field. The fuel is your fertilizer. My soil will hold more fuel because it has a higher number. So I can get away with applying once a year. Now, other people that have a lower number have a lower fuel tank. So they cannot get as much into their fuel tank. They can apply it, but it's not going to stay in the soil. It could wash through, it could wash off. So they might have to reapply twice on a 60-day crop, where I can get away with once for sure. So they also give you recommendations. Here, it also gives me, how many pounds of limestone per 100 square feet, which is 11. So that's very similar to the numbers we have. And then, even though I tell them I'm organic, they give me all of the standard agricultural things to add to my plot. So that's kind of what it is in a nutshell. I like to take this to a whole nother level. That's why I do all this. I do have a spreadsheet that we'll look at next and discuss on kind of where it came from and how to use it. And I'll also have this available to download as well. This is a spreadsheet that I put together to examine our soils and kind of see which direction we need to go with them. A lot of this has to do with the theory of base saturation to determine a lot of our levels. There is and isn't a lot of science to this. A lot of big universities have tried to prove that this is the ultimate way to go, which no one really conclusively has from all the paperwork I can find. But almost every single big soil laboratory you use will report numbers back with your base saturation levels. These are actually based off of your CEC. So your base saturation, it looks at the relationship between the cation exchange sites in the soil. Basically, the CEC is the primary driver of this, and it's looking for an ideal ratio in between the potassium, the calcium, the magnesium, the sodium, your hydrogen bonds, which I don't have on here, and there's another grouping in here as well. These numbers, after you calculate them, actually add up to your CEC. So they're using this as a percentage of CEC, which would be cation exchange capacity. So it looks at your potassium, your calcium, your magnesium, and your sodium. And the way to calculate these is you take your test results, which are typically in parts per million, and you divide these each by their individual constants. So that gives you your MEQ, 100 grams per MEQ, which is your mega or milli equivalent. So that's just another term to do a conversion to get it to an equivalence to actually work where everything is in the same, I guess, ballpark to actually relate them together. So here is numbers that I have arrived at. I've looked at a lot of different work and a lot of different people's work, and this is the best that I can really find on ranges for these base saturation levels. I mean, there's a lot of variation in between different studies, different soil labs, and different people. So basically what I did is I took high ranges and low ranges and combined them, and we try to arrive somewhere in the middle. If your test results are in pounds per acres that you receive back, you simply divide them by 2 and then put these into these equations and then divide it by your total CEC number, which will give you your base percentage. Ideally, you want to look at it in between these two numbers. That is ideally where you get the best exchange of energy from soil to plant as the soil scientists see it. The final thing about using the base saturation method is that your CEC is actually the driver of the amount that you'll be amending into your area. If you have a lower CEC, you will be applying less of these because it will not exchange as well. And we'll see that in the next sheet we look at. So just because I go and add, I don't know, 100 parts per million of potassium does not mean you will as well. It is solely dependent on the CEC number of your specific soil type. Now, the final tab we have is where all the magic actually happens. I have this already filled in with my numbers from my Plot 7 report from the Ag Lab. So the yellow boxes are the ones you fill in. So we'll start at the top. In our pH, doesn't particularly matter because it's not going to do any calculations with the pH. We do have our target high and low to look at, CEC as well, which this will actually work in the calculations. Now we're looking at our bed size. Now, because we use the market garden method, we have 2.5 foot wide beds, which are 30-inch wide beds, and all of my beds are actually 40 foot long, which just so happens to come out to 100 square feet, which makes calculating very easy. My plots, there's 32 beds in them of that size. So these will all go into calculations of determining the amount of amendments we will need for this one field. You could do the exact opposite, just do one bed and say it's a 200 square foot plot, and you just amend the whole entire thing. It does do some more calculation where it looks at what the square footage of the bed tops are, not the walk paths, and the number of acres it is. So we entered in all of our results in parts per million. You could do the same in pounds per acres. That's what LB per AC is, which actually I believe the correct abbreviation is PPA, but that just got confusing with me in the PPM because PPM is parts per million. So next, it'll convert our parts per million to pounds per acre. I do this because it makes calculating the amount of amendments we need much easier to calculate. So from here, we enter in all of our results. We have our base saturation area, which is right here. Gives us what our actual percentages are coming off of the field and what the target highs and lows are. And as you can see, I pretty much fall in here. My calcium's a little bit low and my magnesium's a little bit low percentage-wise. The way to alleviate this is to use dolomitic lime. It's got both of these in here. It'll move my pH and it'll add more magnesium. Same thing I did when I initially amended these fields. Now eventually, once I push my magnesium levels to where they need to be, I'll just use straight lime. Make sure to check the type of lime you're getting. and its uses and the rate to apply it to your fields. Now, the next two columns over here are target levels. Same thing with these numbers. I found stuff all over the board when I was trying to dial these numbers in. So what I did is took the more reasonable lows and the highs. The highs are all pretty much consistent. I mean, there's not too much difference in here. Nitrogen's typical 150 to 200 pounds per acre. That's simple. Phosphorus, these are numbers that are actually set standards, at least through our ag lab, of targets I try to meet. From what I find a lot of people like to do is keep their potassium and their phosphorus levels equal, but that's most likely because they have much lower potassium levels. I have an extremely, extremely high potassium level out here on my land, and I'm well aware of this. Same thing as sulfur levels. These are kind of numbers that we're looking through. Like the MySoil test results gave me a 27, which would actually be, that's in parts per million. We make it pounds per acre. Now that's 52, which would be perfect in this range. We would not be exceeding it. Now, the calcium and magnesium, sodium, and potassium are all based off of base saturations as well. These target numbers actually come out of the calculation. So these are based solely off of the CEC from up here. Lower CEC, the lower these numbers will actually be. The higher the CEC, the higher these numbers. I mean, we'll just change it real quick just for the fun of it. And you'll see that these numbers will indeed drop quite dramatically. Now we will change that back. Finally, we have our micronutrient numbers. Again, same thing. I found stuff all across the board, and I just kind of found what I would consider the most consistent and most reasonable numbers. Now, again, in pound per acres. So, I mean, we're coming in pretty close. Low manganese level, like I said earlier, that's why I kind of questioned the MySoil test on the manganese. The rest of them, pretty much in line. I mean, I can use more copper, but I've always been warned by all the soil consultants and soil scientists out there that you really don't want to mess with your copper too much, because that is your last line of defense for like a powdery mildew or other mildews, because the products that fight these that are organic are copper based. So now that we know what we have, we need to know where we are going. And that's where this next section comes in. Very, very useful. So basically I have the same thing that I had up top, and I brought it down here. Now, I have room for 3 different inputs here, and these are just the common ones that I use. Well, the first 2 are. The third one is one I'm considering having to use. So I can enter that, and then I could change the amount I want to add to each field. It gives a total amount, the amount that I have to mend if I put it over a whole entire acre, and then it actually goes back and tells me how much mix to put per bed top. So I could actually scoop it out in a cup and hand sprinkle it. So these are the results. They come directly from the top up there. I'm using the average in between the high and the low as a baseline, not necessarily looking at, well, it's more of a target to aim at than the high number or the low number. So of course, you know, my nitrogen is low. Sulfur, magnesium, calcium, they were all low, but remember, they were not that low. We'll just move this back, all these to 0. As you can see, these are over the lower number. Anything green, we do not need to worry about. We do not need to mess with. Anything not lit up, we do have to work with. So this will give me the requirements per field. This makes it easier to look at number-wise to know how much you need to apply to the field, not just to the bed top. When you get to the point where you're looking at just beds, then these numbers get really, really small, and they're really, really hard to interpret. So we enter our fertilizer in there. We enter the percentages off of the bag, which will tell us, you know, our N, P, and K. This also has sulfur and calcium. I also use a product called Microhume occasionally. It's not as much of a humic acid as it is a micronutrient addition. It has a little bit of nitrogen, which I believe comes along with the humic acid, and then it contains sulfur calcium, which would be your gypsum. But here's your micronutrients that are the ones that I try to move up. Your manganese, zinc, copper, and boron. These are very, very important. But this stuff can only be applied in very, very small amounts, which again makes it additionally hard to amend on a large scale through a broadcast seeder. Now another manganese sulfate, which would bring my manganese up, is a sulfate, so it brings sulfur with it. So I have to be careful and watching that as well. So kind of what I figured, just playing around with my numbers. If I had 50 pounds of my NatureSafe, I did bring one in. Did not bring my nitrogen up past, so we'll kick that up to 100 pounds. Great, now I bring my nitrogen in. Now if I wanted to go crazy and say 200 pounds over that one plot, now we've kicked in the red. That means we're over the max that we should have in it. We are raising these outside of the high range. You're fine if you're not too far out when you're trying to work on this amendment cycle here, because needless to say, it's really finicky if you don't have a specific mix made for you. But you can get close. A lot of times you have to be way, way over to cause issues. I like to go on the side of being low than anything, and I'll kind of show you that when we go out in the field and show you exactly what the crops look like. And this is where you can really go down the rabbit hole of working on your soil and building it to the ideal soil. When honestly, for what a lot of people do, you're just trying to have, I hate to say it, but good enough soil to where it works for your needs. You can go through and you can try to find the ideal ones of these to make everything line up perfectly. But are you going to get that much more of an advantage and yield and quality of produce from having, say, your copper just a little bit low or your manganese just a little low? I personally don't think that is the end of the world not to have these all super balanced. I am more or less trying to get these things in line with near these levels, but not these exact levels. I mean, just trying to find ideal levels alone is enough of a pain as trying to get these to perform exactly the same. Now, we're going to go ahead out in the field now, and I can kind of show you in this plot. You know, we'll just take this stuff off of here real quick, and we see how much stuff we're missing from this field. And I will show you the results. The pH is low. We have low phosphorus numbers, which are almost there. Our sulfur, calcium, magnesium, they're all low. Our manganese and our copper are low. But it really doesn't seem to matter all that much because we still have beautiful crops out there. So let's go out in the field and take a look. So heading out in this field on this beautiful fall day, you can kind of see what we have going and the way our crops look out here. I mean, we do a lot of lettuce and greens out here. As you can see from this plot behind me, I mean, they just look beautiful. We do have a little bit of cold damage, but nothing major. But I mean, this plot right here, low pH, low copper, low sulfur, and a couple other things. And I mean, it grows great produce. Same thing with everything else out here in these fields. We might have some of those low numbers, but in all, I mean, we have beautiful products out here. That's where it really boils down to with a lot of people. You don't need to go the full gamut of soil tests to really get an idea of how your soil is performing. The best way is to actually come in here and look. If it looks healthy, if it looks like it's doing good, then most likely it is doing really good and it's really healthy soil. That being said, you can go down the rabbit hole and try to amend things to the umpteenth level and have the perfect soil. Now, are you going to gain all that much from having the perfect soil? My thoughts have always been probably not. So most
home gardeners and homesteaders out there, the My Soil test will be perfect. You can look, you see, hey, I'm here. I need to have things a little bit more up here. So I can just slowly amend through the years and work my way up. Pull a soil test a year, no problems. Out here, I like to go a little bit more down the rabbit hole just because I can, and that's what I kind of do. So I try to bring my levels up to those more ideal levels. But again, I'm not just going to go from here and go blam, ideal. I'm going to go from here and I'm going to slowly step my way up. The one thing I am starting to learn out here, at least with my soil, is I really need to take soil samples from each of these plots more frequently because I've had a drop in pH. I only took samples from this plot and then I went out to the main field blocks and I took them from the unamended areas, which I did put calcium down on one of these, but from the results I saw, I can't even see it. But that way I had baseline tests. Now I know I need to take soil samples from here, the field behind me, the greenhouses, and the other plots I have scattered around there up more towards the house, because I really need to get those pH numbers, because the way it's dropping, where I had those at like 6.8 2 or 3 years ago, and they're down at 5.5 now, I'm going to be back down to the original like 5.3 this land usually is baselined at very quickly if I don't really start working on this. And that is the one great thing about taking soil tests, is that you know this. Without this, looks great, I would never know that the soil is not doing as ideally as it should. The pH really has a lot to do with the amount of nutrients they will uptake without doing foliar applications, but I like to keep everything in the soil. I don't like to do foliar applications to correct problems, because to me that's just a band-aid. That is not actually fixing the problem that you have. So that is the analysis of our results of our soil test. If you missed out on the first half, I actually tested the soil 2-3 weeks ago. Check it out, How to Test Your Soil. Search my page, just look back a couple videos, you should be able to find it, because I'll never remember to put the little link up there like everybody does. So the spreadsheet itself will be over at arkenbergfarms.com. That's our website. Scroll down to the bottom, digital tools and training. It's down there with a whole bunch of other cool stuff. Be sure to download it, play with it, find any tweaks, let me know. I could work on it. So hope you all like what you saw today. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank y'all. Have a good day.